Welcome everyone to this two-day extravaganza, Work as Art, Art as Work, with the most amazing cast ever. All 12 of the artists in residence from the Lantz Artists in Residence program in McGill's Faculty of Education since its very beginning in 2015. I think just bringing together, managing to have all of these artists on one screen over the course of 2 days seems like a miracle. So thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Claudia Mitchell. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Education and in the Department of Integrated Studies, and I'm the chair of the Lantz Artists in Residence Advisory Committee. And indeed, this is a very special event made possible by Zoom. We have lots that we hope we will accomplish over the course of the 2 days. One is just, is meant to be celebratory. This is quite an important, I think, quite an important event for the faculty. The Faculty of Education is one of the few faculties in Canada that has an artist in residence program. They are becoming, art residencies are becoming more and more popular and burgeoning in other faculties outside of the arts as well as inside the arts. But for a Faculty of Education, it's been a pretty special piece that we've been working on since 2015. So celebratory that we're here, we're doing this, and that we've been bringing people together in the arts for this period of time. It's also meant to be a type of reunion of sorts because it's a program that's been going on for a number of years, since 2015. We have two artists most years, but so the artists each year know each other. So we had Maria Escura and Jimmy Baptiste, Aaron Richmond and Victoria Stanton, then Debbie Maya and Lou Shepard, then Emily Brindamore and Nadia Ross, and then Laurie Bevis and Kamal Lamacarel, Jay Lotus overlapping, and then number 12, Dayna, kind of collaborating with everybody. It's kind of this idea of this group of people who are kind of know each other but don't know their work constantly, and really bringing people together in this kind of a meeting. It's also meant to be very provocative. What are these artists who had all spent 2 semesters at least, in most cases, and one a little bit shorter in the faculty, but what are they doing now? Where is their work going? How does it relate to what they were doing? And of course, deep engagement with the questions themselves around work as art and art as work. And that thematic area that our leader for this, Dr. Dayna McLeod, has really thought through very carefully as to how we bring this together. And of course, it's finally meant to be a very forward-looking event about the future and the various plans that we have for what can come out of this symposium and where we're going with this. So that idea of both looking a little bit back and also looking a little bit forward. It has historical moments throughout, probably the most important one being space. The first artist in residence had just found a space in a faculty that had no space. Then we had an art hive for a couple of years until that space was needed. Eventually we had 2 artists in residence who had their own mobile unit. I'm thinking of Emily's mobile cart that kind of sped through the hallways and the conference or the main lobby. And then we went totally virtual, and that's where we are today. So these kinds of historical spaces, as well as celebratory spaces, as well as meeting spaces, as well as provocative spaces, and finally future spaces. And this future space, we really, of course, acknowledge fully, and you'll be hearing more about Pauline Smith, Lantz, who endowed this piece in the first place, and her vision for what an artist in residency would look like in a Faculty of Education, and my many colleagues who've led that, including Dr. Elizabeth Wood. And then finally, to have number 12 of the artist in residence, who's actually taken the meta of this and turned the project of the artist in residency into bringing together the artist in residency. I don't know how much cooler that could be. So take a bow, Dayna, take a bow to all 12 artists in residence who are residency who are going to be in and out over the 2 days, and to thank all my colleagues and all of you for coming and joining this event, and really again acknowledging Pauline Smith's incredible legacy to us and for what could happen. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to get off the screen for now. In this way, I will be moderating a panel later as we're about to on day 2. But I'm going to turn it over right now to my dear colleague, Dr. Bronwen Low from the Department of Integrated Studies and Education, who is going to moderate the first panel and really take us into the land acknowledgements and taking us how we're going to operate and, of course, work with the first 3 speakers who are here. And maybe just to say that Bronwen is a well-known scholar in the area of youth studies, media studies. You will hear more about her, but really to say that there is probably no colleague that I have ever had anywhere, and I have been at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the University of Prince Edward Island and McGill, but a colleague who really is a team player, who's always there, jumping in, able to kind of manage pieces, and is kind of like, just has been the perfect academic citizen and community citizen in making things happen. So Bronwen, over to you, and thank you so much for being willing to be the first moderator in the first Work as Art, Art as Work Symposium. So over to you, Bronwen, and thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. That was very unexpected and delightful. Thank you for that. It is my great pleasure to host this session. So I'll start by saying bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first panel for Art as Work, Work as Art, a symposium showcasing McGill University's Faculty of Education, Lantz residency artists and their practices. And I'm delighted to be with you today for the very first panel. Dayna and I were calling it the pajama panel, but so far I'm not seeing any pajamas out there. We recognize it is early, but it's wonderful to see you all here. The session will be recorded, so please feel free to have your camera on or off. Any video of this and all of the sessions will be posted to YouTube and on the Symposium website, which is posted in the chat. So I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. Art as Work, Work as Art is hosted by McGill University, which is physically located in Djogé, otherwise known as Montreal, and situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. This land has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territories on which peoples of the world now gather. I would also like to share an acknowledgement developed by the Feminist Media Studio at Concordia for our pandemic forms of assembly. Quote, while Zoom, a company that has exploded in value during the COVID-19 pandemic, is the technical custodian of the platform on which we gather, this makes us no less occupants of the multiple territories in which we're all physically located. Zoom's headquarters are located on Mukmekwe Ohlone territory. The Ohlone have historically understood about sustainability, communal societies, giving gifts to those who pass by, and sharing space. Their horizontal organization might inspire different emergent models of peer-to-peer networking in the pandemic than we're enacting today in Zoom. We see Zoom as a platform which connects us and alienates us from the aims of restitution, justice, and reparation. And we are going to post a link to that, I think, very interesting acknowledgement in the chat. So Art as Work, Work as Art is brought to you by the Lantz Initiative for Excellence in Education and the Arts. And it's coordinated by the Faculty of Education, the Department of Integrated Studies and Education, the Institute for Human Development and Wellbeing, and the Participatory Cultures Lab. This initiative is made possible by the generous support of Pauline Smith. And after today's panel, I invite you to watch a short video about Pauline's contributions and this initiative that is also going to be posted on the Symposium website and pasted in the chat. The Artist in Residence program has been a cornerstone of the Lantz Initiative for Excellence in Education and the Arts. And so this two-day symposium, as Claudia mentioned, features presentations by all 12 of the past residency artists, and was organized by Dayna McLeod. First, it seems a real feat that 12 people were able to commit for the same 2 days. So that in itself, I think, is remarkable and bodes really well for our conversations. And thank you to Shannon Roy, who's assisting us with the conference, keeping us on track during the panels. And so first and foremost, for today's event, I want to thank you for being here. And we appreciate that it's early. If you're here at 8 a.m. Eastern time or whatever time zone you are in right now. And during this panel, please feel free to use the chat function to share thoughts, comments, and relevant links. There will be a Q&A after all 3 of the artist presentations, and you can raise your digital hand to ask a question or post your questions in the chat if you prefer that I read them out. We ask that you keep your mic on mute during the presentations. So today's panel features current artists in residence Dayna McLeod and past artists in residence Richmond and Jimmy Baptiste. I'll briefly introduce each of them before their 15 to 20-minute presentations and paste a longer bio for your reference about them in the chat. And so again, after the last presentation, we'll open it up for questions and discussions. So presenter number 1 is Dayna McLeod, the 12th and current Lantz Artist in Residence. She is a middle-aging queer performance-based artist and Fonds de Recherche du Québec Société et Culture Research Creation Postdoctoral Fellow. And I am thrilled to be here with her, in part because I've been following Dayna's career for many years in various cabaret and other festive, feminist, and queer performance settings. So it's over to you, Dayna. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for being here. Oh my goodness. It was the magic of Doodle that made everything, right? The magic of the Doodle to coordinate everyone. So just super, super thrilled to be here. I'm going to do that awkward moment where I'm sharing my screen. And then if you could give me the thumbs up that it is in fact working. Thanks so much for the introduction. And thanks Claudia as well for all your support. This is just it's just really overwhelming and fantastic. I'm going to show you all of the graphics I made for this symposium as part of my presentation, including this kind of caffeine-induced color palette that is happening. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, so this is formatted for Facebook, this one is formatted for Instagram. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is not only the work that I've been doing in this residency as the current artist in residence, the 12th artist in residence as part of this program, but also talk about how I situate my own work in an institution like McGill that is, fairly, depending on the department, right, a fairly safe space, but also can be a challenging space to present queer feminist work. I also want to talk about the labor that goes into not only arts-based practices, but being an artist in residence, and how one of my not so secret agendas in my residency has been to address and talk about these labor practices, how institutions can support artists, how institutions, departments, specific faculty are citing artists' work, are using artists in the classroom as special guest stars or through citational practices. So I actually had 2 artist in residency terms, one last spring, which seems like 1,000 years ago, at the end of year 1 of the pandemic. It was a 10-week contract, and I feel I accomplished quite a bit in that 10 weeks. And then I was offered to continue in a year-long residency that started in September 2021 and actually ends in 2 days. So, all of the wrap up for the symposium, it'll be done by then. It's lots of times, no problem. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about here is, in fact, not only account for the labor that goes into, say, a symposium like this, the video that that Shannon was able to post in the chat, that basically made over the last couple of days with Dr. Elizabeth Wood, who wrote and narrated a tribute to Pauline Lantz Smith, Lantz, who so generously has created this situation for the 12 of us, the 12 artists in residence, to work and practice at in the Faculty of Education for different time periods. So there is sort of an accounting I want to do of some of the activities I did during my artist in residence, and really with an emphasis on different ways of engaging with artists in residence at McGill, but all because there is sprouting up, right? Lots of artists in residency programs at McGill within different departments, and those are all different, obviously, with different artists, but with different focus. And at in the Faculty of Education, you may or may not know, in terms of what we are asked to do, and the job call that I responded to was to support faculty, staff, students with arts-based methods, and my specific call was to support in digital methods. And that is predominantly because it was a remote residency. I don't think I set foot. I went to one meeting with Claudia on campus during the pandemic. But one of the things in this accounting that I wanted to talk about were various ways that I engaged with the Faculty of Education community through, like, for example, you see two posters. You can see I do enjoy a color palette. One of the workshops that I did was called Activist and Community-Based Artwork, Artists and Practices, that really focused and looked at how professors are using artists in the classroom, and with the potential to develop a portfolio and a resource. This is something that I've done in the classroom as an instructor, where students pool together artists that they like, artists that they know or are familiar with, as a means to share those resources, and have a kind of this touchstone through an assignment, and build a catalog that everyone contributes to. So this was an exercise that we did in this workshop, but also with a focus on local and national artist profiles and portfolios. Certainly in Montreal, certainly in Quebec, certainly in Canada, we have a plethora of artists, and that these artists are a good resource, certainly. And when I say resource, I don't mean for exploitation, certainly for consultation. And that's one of the things that I was focused on as well, is citational practices. If you find an image on the internet, how are you citing those images? How are you citing those sources? How are you using that material in the classroom with students, and then modeling that type of citational practice and behavior, really? And something else that kind of came out of that was this need for digital curation for the classroom. So where to look for resources, how to use them. And we just did some very, very light digital tool usage in terms of looking at, say, how to manage a Vimeo playlist or a YouTube playlist, or looking at the National Film Board of Canada, right, who has a lot of online resources, and through McGill, the Canopy app, through the McGill Library, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, it's free, and they have a whole catalog of classic films, documentary films, lots of teachable films that that can support a lot of different subjects and different varieties. So these were just two of the workshops that I gave, and one that didn't get a poster made because it was I hit the ground running. I think we did a workshop 1 week into when I began. And it was really about how to stage that last class. I think, if you remember 10 years ago, last March, if you were teaching a class, just trying to get to the finish line and trying to get students to the finish line. And so one of the things that we were talking about was how to, the mechanics of putting students' work visually represented, or if they were doing podcasts online. So what are the mechanics of that? But also just how to, collectively breathe and celebrate the students that this is the end of the semester. Little did we know that we would be engaging in another year, but that's another story. And so I mentioned these workshops and to talk about some of the work that I actually did in the residency. And again, looking at online artist catalog resources with some very specific references, but also this question of talking about arts-based methods, through their definition, through how you're using them in the classroom, and what are some of the examples, just to get a feel for what people were doing and using, and guiding then people to, like I said, citational practices, but looking at how people are using artwork in the classroom, the benefits of inviting an artist into the classroom, other than, perhaps taking a break from writing a lecture for one class. And how to support artists in the classroom. And so that became my not so secret agenda of the residency, in terms of how much does your department pay for guest speakers, right? And in one of in this particular workshop, the range was anywhere from $50 to $350, and that was very rare. The $350 was very rare. And so that type of support, that material support, becomes so important, because, if you want to classify artists within a gig economy, for example, we are often precarious workers. And so how can you support artists? And the big one is pay them for their time, pay them for their material. It's not really just about showing up for say 20 minutes to a symposium. It's the prep time that goes in. If it's, in person, there's also transportation to and from. How are you able to support artists and through material conditions? And do you have tenure? Do you have the power within your program and department to vouch for, speak to, change some of these policies that are not paying a livable wage for that type of labor? And so something else that I was able to do was to meet one-on-one with people about specific assignments, specific projects, and it really gave me an opportunity to look at how open various staff, faculty, and students are to research creation methods, and arts-based methods specifically, and the many different ways that people are engaging with that in assignments and exercises. Now, I also had opportunity to produce a video of my own work. And I say my own work, and I'm making that distinction because I feel the majority of the work that I did and have done in the artist residency is for other people. And my work, or within my practice, I'm performing for other people, but I'm often dealing with subjects, queer, feminist, and body-based subjects that I've been very nervous to present in the classroom. So just in terms of that distinction and that, kind of performing vulnerability, I've only really experimented with in the last semester. Several professors had me come in to give guest lectures in their classes, and since January has really been the first time where I've kind of deep dived into showing some of my work. And so one of the pieces that I made was how to perform teaching during a pandemic, and this was made out of outtakes from a lecture, basically a lecture-based course that we were all filming, or at least I was filming last year, or 2 years ago, in a gender studies class. And so the residency afforded me the time and, again, material conditions to be able to make that work. And so one of the things that, as I said, I've started to do just in January, especially coming into classrooms that aren't necessarily gender studies or feminist studies or communication studies or arts-based programs, is to give a disclaimer about the work that I'm going to present puts me in a vulnerable position. And it's probably something that you might find bizarre, or that you might find strange, or, and you might have that reaction to it because perhaps you're not familiar with queer or feminist performance art, right? And I've got to say that has, it's changed how I present the work. But also, I feel it grounds students to that sensitivity. And what I mean by that is my sensitivity is, it's kind of, certainly making me more vulnerable by kind of flagging, hey, that there's a person on the other side here talking about intimacy, talking about vulnerability, showcasing the body in a very intimate way that you perhaps are not familiar with. And this is just an example of one of those works called Intimate Karaoke Live at Uterine Concert Hall. And in a nutshell, my uterus is a concert hall for karaoke party. If you would like to know more, you can go to my website at daynarama.com. So bringing us back to these graphics and the symposium, one of the projects that Claudia and I are cooking up is to do a book project, to do a monograph with all the artists. And so the goal is to do a book with a contribution from each of the 12 artists, as well as a contribution from a scholar about that artist, about each of the artists. So if this is you, if you are super interested in writing about one of the artists and their work for this book, please write to me at dayna.mcleod@mcgill.ca. I'll also send out information about that for more of a call for submissions. But this is something that we're hoping to kind of, I don't want to say tie up, but like with a bow, wrap up and present some of this work that all the artists in residence have been doing, that have done and continue to do. So that's it for me. I'm not sure if we'll certainly take questions at the end. Yes. And again, if you want to contribute to the monograph, throw your name in the chat, and we will keep it and get back to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dayna. I think you have raised really important questions about art and labor. And, I think artists might be in that category, which is most on the rhetoric of social value is the highest and compensation is the lowest. There's a great gap between how we say we feel about the arts and how, as a society, we actually compensate the arts. So thank you for raising those questions, and also about precarity and vulnerability and the intimacy of being an artist in residence. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Okay, it is my great pleasure to next introduce Erin Richmond, who is the 7th Lantz Artist in Residence and was an artist in residence in the 2017-2018. Erin is an interdisciplinary artist and doctoral candidate in the History and Theory of Architecture program at McGill University. His doctoral project addresses the medicalization of modern art and architecture within the French periodical L'Esprit Nouveau, which was published between 1920 and 1925. In 21-22, he's working with Mass Culture in Montreal, Arts Interculturelles, as one of 5 national researchers looking at the role of the arts in civic society. We'll also be posting Erin's bio in the chat for a few more details. I would also add that working with Erin during his tenure was the one and only time that I made holiday gift cards, and I think it set up very unrealistic expectations for the rest of my life. But thank you for giving me that one moment where I felt like I was crafty and generous.
Thanks, Bronwen, and hi everybody. Dayna, thank you. What a way to start. There's a lot to respond to, and to follow from how you are framing this symposium. I'm gonna share screen. Give me a second. Okay, is that okay? You can see. Okay, so. What I thought I would do or try to do is to sort of situate my time as a Lantz artist in residence in relationship to other work I've done, and to try to do that in response to something I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is the difference between the time and the energy that goes into art making and the time and the energy that goes into creating the conditions for art making. So securing the time and the space, bringing materials together, coordinating with people, figuring out money, how to live, a lot of the things that Dayna, you were just talking about. And, like many artists I know, in my early 20s and when I started making work, I became habituated to taking these sort of periodic breaks where I did nothing but apply for grants and residencies. I'd step back and project forward these little oases of time and space for production. And without knowing it, I think that this habit produced a kind of internal division between one set of operations that was oriented towards the creation of new work. So whether that's drawing, painting, sculpture, it doesn't really matter. And then one set of operations that was about imagining the conditions or imagining a set of circumstances for making that work. And for me, I think more than anything else, the main preoccupation of this second kind of thinking has been to imagine the spatial conditions in which work gets produced. So another maybe simpler way of saying this is that I have in various ways at different points been really interested in visualizing and reimagining the conventions of the studio. So here you're looking at an image of a chicken coop that during COVID, for a number of reasons, my life sort of became somewhat messy. My partner and I had a kid, and I was trying to figure out how to finish my PhD. So what you're looking at is, I'm just going to scroll through some images of this space, which has really become kind of just a placeholder for a number of practices that have been largely put on hold. So it's a space that I return to, but intermittently. And yeah, again, it's kind of a reminder of what is possible when the PhD is over. So when I began to make art in my early 20s, the studio was a convention that I adopted to engage in a set of material and conceptual processes. And there were a couple points of orientation for me that in retrospect were important. One was I remember watching a documentary called Painter's Painting by Emile D'Antonio, and just sort of absorbing. It was about this group of post-war American artists. And what I was drawn to was the idea that, that they would withdraw into their studio and experiment with materials and use that as a way of accessing new languages of form and feeling. And I remember just really being drawn to this sort of paradox of a kind of public engagement that comes through an initial withdrawal into a largely private space. Another point of orientation for me, sorry, let me just another point of orientation for me was I remember hearing a lecture by the art historian Brownie Fair talking about the German artist Eva Hesse and her studio practice, and her saying that for Hesse, abstraction was less about producing a visual language that was abstract and was more about the way the studio enabled her to distribute her subjectivity into a material environment. So you sort of work in a space, and somehow in working and distributing yourself into the space and into these different projects and different sets of materials, you sort of broke down the barriers of your usual way of operating and your usual ways of identifying yourself, and you extended yourself into different material conditions. And I remember really being that's just sort of stuck with me for a long time. Also from the same era, I remember being pretty relieved actually to read a comment made by the American painter Robert Motherwell, who said that he was the kind of studio artist that when not making art was thinking about what art meant. And for a long time, I sort of repeated that mantra in my head because it gave me a kind of permission to pursue art making in tandem with other more critical or academic pursuits, that you could have this kind of duality. But I think the thing that I'm hoping to confront in this talk, or take this occasion to think about, is the fact that Motherwell's idea of an artist divided between working and thinking about work, that it doesn't quite describe the reality that I'm actually living. And that if I'm honest, I'd have to say that I'm actually an artist that when not making art is trying to produce the conditions for making art. And that's what my life really looks like, is that it's either one or the other. And as Dayna alluded to, the desire to produce the conditions for work can be thought about in different terms. I know an anthropologist who's very interested in the way that art is now produced as a function of the gig economy and follows new forms of economic precarity. So the residency is definitely one of those structures where you produce a period of a couple of months in which you can actually live and work as an artist, and in addition to that, I think the thing that I want to address here is a kind of perversity that comes as a result of this division. So again, a division between working and producing the conditions of working. And for me, the perversity has to do with the realization that even while working over the last 10, 15 years, like even when I am in a studio and I do have the conditions for making work, there's been an increasing fixation on visualizing or somehow reimagining those conditions of working. So in other words, it's as though when I'm working, I can't actually believe that I'm working. Like, oh, is it really happening? And so I just continue to project forward into a future set of conditions. So the studio that was once a functional requirement for making work has now entered into the actual substance of the work itself. So I want to give a few examples of this before turning to my experiences as a Lantz artist in residence. And that's Olia, our daughter, on the far left there, next to brutalist cement maquettes. Okay, so the first example that I'll give, second. So in 2014, I had a residency at the Vermont Studio Center, and I had a studio that was divided into two parts. And on one side of the studio, there was a large and brightly lit room with 20-foot ceilings. And on the other side of the room was a small kind of alcove space that looked onto that room. In that studio, it became very natural to set up the alcove with a drawing table or drafting table and use that drafting table to sort of project ideas into the larger space. So you can kind of see it in this drawing, but this is the kind of drawing I was doing in the little alcove space. And there was something, let me see. So, and this is the, these are images of these very, albeit austere kind of results, but actually that space, there was something very natural about dividing the space into, you know, one part of the room and also one part of the day that was about sitting down with paper and sort of thinking about the space and projecting into it, and this sort of almost like heady frontal lobe kind of way. And then a second part of the space, or a second part of the day that was about, you know, clumsily kind of banging materials together and putting things together, and then also initiating collaborations within that space. So all of these things that you're looking at were all kind of created as structural prompts for a set of movements and that were developed with other people. A second important project for me came during a 2-year residency at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. And there, these questions about the conditions of working entered into a more relational or dialogical mode. So I had seen the image that you're looking at is a work by the Brazilian artist Lygia Clark, and it was a small architectural maquette entitled A Casa do Poeta. So it's the house of a poet. And at the time, I was living in this residency with 10 artists and 10 writers, and there was one writer living in what was called Barn 3, which was the third floor of a loft space of a barn that had been passed down over many generations of artists and writers. And I was interested in the fact that the writers worked in the same spaces that they lived in. And I wanted to somehow put my own studio in conversation with that of a writer. So what eventually evolved was that in my studio, I made a full-size replica of the apartment on my studio walls, and entered into a sort of exchange of letters with the writer then living in that space. And we did these sort of swaps of time in each other's space. So she would enter my studio and I would enter the apartment, and we would just sort of make work in relationship to each other's. And it wasn't quite a collaboration. It was sort of this sort of maybe mutual voyeurism of a kind of way of working, you know. And so that is, in the end, this was a sort of composite of that apartment that was produced in the studio that was then used as the basis for movements. In this case, it was my own body moving in relationship to a series of letters that were written by the writer. So yeah, I'm gonna. And the last residency I'll show is just before coming to McGill. I had a residency at the printmaking co-op Atelier Circulaire, and there I was just interested in the material conditions of the space and the objects that had been used and sort of passed down through all these generations of people working in that space. So these are the felts that were used in the Intaglio studio. This was a drawing rack. These are photolithographs of objects in that space. This was a drawing rack for the blotting paper. And these were these emergency eye washing stations that I turned into photolithographs and then collaged in different ways. And it was sort of, again, it was this, I had a residency, I had all these plans of doing things, and then in the end, I just sort of wanted to look at the studio, So, so now in 2017-18, as a Lantz Artist in Residence, I was also an incoming student in the Department of Architecture. And in coming to McGill, I was really preoccupied by how little space existed on campus for anything creative. And the first thing that excited me was the atrium in the education building. And together, it's incredible space. And together with Victoria Stanton and with Lisa Lorenzino, who was then teaching a class in music education, the first project that I was involved with was to use the atrium as a site for collaboration. So we talked to students in the music education program about the difference between composition and construction. Let me just check, am I okay for time? I can't see my chat window. Yeah. So, Bronwen, am I okay? I can't see my chat. Am I okay for time? Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't been, it is
okay.
10 to 9.
Yeah, you have about 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'll move this. So the idea with this project was we went into a class of music education students, and we talked about the difference between producing compositions and producing constructions, or thinking about their work in terms of composition and thinking in terms of construction. And what we meant by that, or what I meant by that, was to think about a group of people coming into a space and trying to imagine a set of parameters for working and for being together in that space. So they all came into the atrium and they got a sense of the space, and then they went back and they thought about what we called scores, or just sort of loose outlines for ideas for how they might relate to each other in that space. And then they came into the space together, and they tried out a couple of them. So we met and we sort of talked over which ones we would try. And then we just tried a couple of them. And I don't have documentation of it here, but I think it's on the website. There was one really beautiful one. There were a couple that were really beautiful where things came together. And one of them was this idea for a work in a staircase. And that you have, again, responding to Dayna, you're talking about making work in an institution, these corridors, like cement corridors where people pass each other every day. And one of the students had an idea for a work where the students would start at one point in the staircase and walk up and down the staircase, playing in response to each other, but keeping the same rhythm as they were moving. So you can move quickly or slowly, but the idea was that you sort of animate and you sort of find the music in relationship to the various speeds that were established by people. And there was just something really, for me, inspiring about seeing these sort of very brief and very small ideas just sort of take off. And, so that's one set of projects that I wanted to share. And then the other one was Victoria. Claudia had mentioned that the residency has sort of moved into different contexts. When Victoria and I were there, and when Debbie was there, we had this incredibly transitional space just adjacent to the Art Hive. So the Art Hive was kind of like the home base for all of us. And it was a really wonderful space to have in that way. And over the course of the year, this transitional space that you're looking at now next to the Art Hive, it sort of became a collecting space for different materials that were to be honest, we just sort of slowly took more liberties with it. It started bringing things into it, started to activate in different ways. We ran a workshop with Kathy Kennedy, the artist Kathy Kennedy, for sound, a sound workshop. And we did some drawing sessions because there was a desire amongst some of the faculty and staff to have drawing in there. And then at one point, and again, it was very brief, but over maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months, in the second part of the residency, there was a group that started to meet, mostly McGill students, but not all, who started to use the space and started meeting weekly. Again, the idea of this group was to just take a set of parameters, like the idea of construction, take a set of parameters, take a set of materials, sort of throw them in the ring and put them in the middle of the space, decide on a way of working, and just sort of see what happens. And so we formalized it in ways, but we really, we called it the Sound in Space Work Group, but it was really just a group of people who started to meet over a period of time and explore ideas. So maybe I will end there.
Thank you, Aaron. I was reminded during your presentation of, I think that word activation is just so helpful. How the artists in residence over the past 12 years have helped bring to life what often feels like a not very interesting building or set of spaces, the concrete brutalism, but you've activated it. You've brought beauty, you've brought life, you've made it, the more interesting, more curious, strange, and that has been such an incredible benefit of the artists in residence. And again, we will have conversation about this at the end of our third presentation, which is from the one and only Jimmy Baptiste, who is the second Lantz Artists in Residence from 2015-2016. Jimmy Baptiste is a father, a youth educator and facilitator, a graphic artist, a curator and muralist raised in Montreal, Quebec. His work is inspired by the imaginative world of tattoos, graffiti and typography, manga culture and comic books. And these have helped him create his unique aesthetic, style, and compelling high-quality illustration. And I just have two things to add about Jimmy. One is one of the dangers of bringing artists in residence into your classroom is everything else pales in comparison. So remember that year, Jimmy came and spoke to a lecture of my students. And afterwards, I heard them in the hallway saying, "Oh, that was a good one." And it was like, oh, well, I guess I'll have to try to be Jimmy. But the other is, it is such a pleasure for me to welcome Jimmy because I had the great honor of working with Jimmy over 4 years in a local high school. And he was the artist in residence there, working across subject matters. And he is not only a gifted artist, but just an extraordinary youth facilitator and educator. So welcome, Jimmy. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for this beautiful introduction, Bronwen. And I would like to really thank, Bronwen, Miss Claudia Mitchell, Dr. Fiona Benson. These were really important people in my life and building my self-confidence as a youth facilitator. I don't have a formal education study like a lot of people around here. I've learned from experience, from the streets, and through trial and error, and also just by building self-confidence in my project. And it's through individuals like this that believed in me and that was able for me to really reach new levels in my life. So what I'll do is I'll stop my camera right now because right now I'm in a First Nation community called Pikachicum in Northern Ontario, close to Winnipeg, doing an art residency. My internet is kind of a little bit unstable, so I do apologize if some stuff might happen. But I've just shared my my page on the McGill website. that explain a little bit of the project that I've done. And I'll also share that on the screen just to do it as an introduction of who I was and how this was really important in my upbringing. So basically, in 2016, I think, or 2016 or 15, my friend Melissa Proity, which is also a collaborator of Dr. Bronwen, contacted me, and she was like, "Yo, this new art residency at McGill University for like artists that wants to do like community-based project. You should really apply." And I was just like this like young cat. I just had a 2-year-old at that time. I was trying to reach new levels in my life, and I didn't really have the confidence to apply to this. But Melissa was like, "Yo, you should at least apply. I'll help you to really like build your portfolio, and just take the chance to go there." So I go to the interview. I still remember that day. I was wearing like a white shirt. I was like super stressful. I couldn't find the door. I arrived at the interview like super sweaty. I was like, oh man. And then I did my presentation, and a couple of weeks after I got the residency, and it was one of the most scariest things in my life that ever happened, because at that moment I was working collaborating with one of the biggest universities in the world, with a brand new project that's building this community-based project, and it was also really new, right? So a lot of this stuff was being discovered through experimentation with me and Maria, which was a great person that I got to meet to this project. So basically the residency that I did was to be able to create a non-formal education setting for a couple students of the school, which were all these artists right here. You have Jareem Lee, James Ding, you had Pauline, Chloe, Corrado, Galit, Parvesh, and Dr. Fiona Benson. So basically what I did is I took these artists and these educators, and I called a bunch of different YMCA community centers that I knew around the city, and I wanted to give them a non-formal setting for them to learn how to create youth facilitating project, get them out of the comfort zone, get them out of their regular setting of learning about how to teach kids, so they can grow through this experience and also learn how they can get out of the comfort zone, learn through the experience, but also get to know the city also through the experience. So we had artists that was English that got put into like French neighborhood. You got like artists that have never been working in like Black and brown neighborhood that got put there trying to facilitate with kids that didn't really care about art that much. And it created a really beautiful dynamic, because the objective for the project, yes, they had to be graded for the project that they were doing, but on my objective was for them to learn about themselves in this setting, learn what works, learn what didn't work, but also learn how they can improve themselves by teaching kids, and get out of that idea that we have to teach every single people in one specific way. And it ended up working really well. Some of the students did some amazing project, and we also ended up doing an art show inside of the pre-Hive space. Unfortunately, my website had some problem and I had to tear it down. I was hoping to work it from here, and my internet doesn't work, so there's nothing on it. But eventually I re-updated. But the other project that I did also is I created a mural in McGill University, where again, I did an open call for people in the university, but also an open call to students all across Montreal for them to create this collaborative project around the word education. So all the different ideas, visuals, and concept came from these individuals, and it was a really great experience. And again, it was one of my first collaborative projects where I had to take a bunch of different ideas from a random minds and bring them together. And that was also one of the first time in my life when I realized that a big part of art facilitating for me was to create a safe space for non-artists to feel comfortable to create and to do art. So I will stop this slide here, and I will share another slide right there. And I will show you a little bit of the project I've been working on since then, because since then, my career as facilitator has really reached new creative levels, where now this type of job is basically what I do for a living. I do art-based projects all across Ontario and Ottawa that brings artists and kids together to create various art-based projects. So, for example, this mural here that's called All of Us Together was created right before I left in Ottawa, and in school called St. Peter's High School. And all the different concepts and all the different ideas come from the kids that created these murals. So one of the things that I've experienced through my space, and like I said, is to create a space for non-artists, because often when I create murals, I tend to have a group of random kids that want to participate with something, they want to be part of something, but they don't know how to do this. So you have to build confidence, you have to build a space for them to feel creative. And you also have, as a facilitator, be the most confident person in the space, even though you don't know what you're doing, because you don't want to share that energy to other people. So what I often do is I create these spaces where kids can share ideas, with visuals, design, and so on. After that, we go on the wall and we trace the concept a little bit like a paint by number idea, where we do the lines and so on. And then often after that, I will find a couple of artists that are really, really super talented or more inclined to art, and I will give them more specific responsibilities. Like, for example, none of the design, like the faces, the hands, were painted by me. They were painted by the kids of that school. And it's because I discovered some of these kids that were like, next level artists. And I was like, okay, I have a responsibility for you. You're painting these hands into different shades of colors. You know how to draw characters. You're painting these faces together. And what was really also is that I'm realizing also that a lot of the kids now and younger youth are a lot more awakened that we were all are when we were their age. So, for example, as we were creating this design, and I showed them the original sketch, some of the kids were like, but we're missing something to pay homage to the Hassanabi people in the land that we live in, because it's Ontario. And they were like, okay, can we represent this? Somebody called out, oh, maybe we can do it as it was a traffic sign that you see on the highway, and we can just put that type of lettering on it. And I was like, you know what? This is such a marvelous idea. And then my job as a facilitator is kind of a way to try to put all these puzzles together to be able to create these projects with these individuals. Another big project now that I've been working on is I got commissioned to create 4 different artwork with 2 other artists in Ottawa for the Algonquin College in Ontario. Algonquin College is a huge college in the Ontario region. They have a campus in Perth, a campus also in Ottawa, in Pembroke. And they wanted to create a mural that was around inclusion and diversity. So what we did over last spring, we did the art facilitating project, where we got people from the faculty and also students to come up with ideas, concept, and design that would reflect the respect to the land, reflect to Indigenous people, the diversity of cultures, and so on. And me and the 2 other artists were able to create these murals. So this is what the first mural that we created here in Perth, with different representation in it. So you can see, for example, this person of color mixed with like this nature theme. Inside of the eye in the middle, you have the medicine wheel, and each of the places also have their own distinction that represents their community. So here you have this image of this Indigenous person, and you also have the vocation of the school. So since it's nature, you have like a moose, and there's also a big woodworking shop over there. We did the one in Ottawa, which was really, really successful. We brought over 15 people to come and paint during a whole entire day. We had the dean of the school, the president of the school that came to paint with us, and we painted this 45-foot mural over a 2-week period with different symbols in it, whether it's that represents different symbols in the school and people. So, and there's a big part of the school that has people with different type of, sorry if I'm not using the right word, but disabilities, for example. So you have the sign language, you have the robotic hand that represent people with the prosthetic, different animals, because they have a big representation for animals that represent the specific culture of this Asanabe people over there, whether it's moose, blue jays, deers, and so on, and indigenous people also. And like I was mentioning also, I got to continue working with Melissa all throughout my work. Melissa has been one of the main person that believed in me, even in sometime I didn't believe in myself. I got to work with her and Bronwen at James Ling, which I'll show you a slide after this one. And this is the latest project that we painted this last fall in Point St. Charles. So we did a couple workshop with these wonderful human beings that are right here. These beautiful people right here. And over a 2-week period, 1 week period, we really kind of figure out, okay, what is the designs that we want? What kind of ideas are represented? So we had themes like racial equality, Black Lives Matter, also gender equality in the mural. And one of the aspects that I love to do when I do collaborative and community-based mural is when I do it in a community, I like to be able to bring the people from these communities to participate in the creative process, but also in the painting of the mural, because it allows the people to really take ownership of the space that they work in, that they live in. They also be part of a collective project, a collective creative energy, where people are able to share, connect with each other. People that don't really know each other, they get to work next to each other and talk to each other. They also get to see how the artists are able to create big scales mural. And we also create an event around these situations. So we'll bring music, we'll bring food, and really make it like almost like a party, something where people can really enjoy themselves as a full-on aspect. Another project also that, sorry, I didn't want to stop my screen. Another project like I was mentioning that I got to work with was with Dr. Bronwen, which was, let me just go on this page right here, and then I'll speak to you about my Indigenous community project. So this is one of the projects that we got to work at James Ling High School. So I worked at James Ling for 4 years, where I was able to like connect with the teachers and the faculties to be able to create different art-based projects in their art gallery, and also get the students to be part of the process of how to create murals. So for example, this project here was called Life of the Southwest, where the students got to interview the different individual that lives in the Southwest of the city of Montreal. You know, they went to do this, the students went to do interviews, they recorded the voices of the people. And after that, we went and took pictures, whether it was online or in person, find different typography to represent some really cool aspect of the city. And then we created this multimedia art show where people can actually see the picture of the person that was talking in the headphones, and created this environment of a visual artwork where that represent different like landmarks of the Southwest. So whether it's the Nouveau Verdun that doesn't exist anymore, you have Diallo also, like all these little landmark that doesn't exist anymore. So this is like a lot of the stuff that I've been doing now in the future. And one of the things that really started to really grow a lot in my life is I got the chance to start working with Indigenous community over the last 7 years. So I've been doing right now, this is my 5th residency in Indigenous community. I got to work twice in in northern Quebec, in a community called Wiscagonish, another one called Nemaska. And this one that I'm showing you right now, this was in Lac Seul, which is north of Thunder Bay, 2 hours from Thunder Bay. So it's about a 12-hour flight and 4-plane to go there in total. It was one of the rudest hardcore project I've ever done in my life. We did this stained glass window that was about 17 feet long by 10 feet high in triangular shape that we had to create in 3 weeks. But the problem is Lac Seul is a lot closer to Winnipeg than it is to Montreal. But the organism that I work with ordered a lot of the things in Montreal, and had to be shipped in Lac Seul. And for people who went to First Nation community, it's really hard to get to some of these places in the middle of the winter. So I went there. It was like end of January, beginning of February. The average weather was about minus 40 over there. And like at that time, there was a snowfall that blocked one of the main roads. So you could see the size of the window with the Indigenous artist that was working with me there on the left corner. So for the first of the 3 weeks, all we did was this design aspect with the students, where we found out the different symbols and idea that represents the community. So whether it's like fishing, beautiful sunsets, medicine wheel, this random boat that is like on the shore for like ages. And then we had basically a week and a half to create the stained glass window project out of epoxy. But the school was not made to be able to create such a large scale project. So the principal was super understanding. She was an amazing woman. So basically what we did, epoxy, for those who know how it works, this one is a non-toxic epoxy, but you need to like put it into really high heat for it to like become basically like glass. So I did a couple tests, and you could see like how like super sketchy some of my techniques had to do. Like I put tape around of the plexiglass. I had cups under for it to hold, because I had to use anything that was around the community to be able to make this project come to its end. And one of the things I spoke with the community, with the organizer that brought me there, I was like, I can't guarantee you that this project will be able to be finished, because you're not giving me a lot of time to do so. But at the end of the day, we ended up being able to fully finish the project. I wasn't able to install it at the end, but they did install it after a couple of weeks. But what was crazy about this project is that once we finished putting all the different epoxy on all the different glass, we had to use the library, which became my studio, for 2 weeks. And we unplugged all the computers over there. We took all the heaters around the school. We put them in that library. We pumped the heat in the library where it felt like at least like plus 40 degrees. And I was with the consentment of the principal. And we basically kind of like crossed the finger that we wouldn't like jump all the different electricity in the community or in the school. But the next day when I saw that everything set very nicely, like I never felt that much relief. And that was one of the hardest projects that I learned from, where I was like, okay, at this point, I can do pretty much anything that I can at any moment, because that was like one of the hardest experience that I had to do and go through. So yeah, this is like a lot of the stuff I got to do. And one of the last thing I will show you now is the last residency that I'm doing right now. So right now I'm in the Ojibwe community. And in this Ojibwe community, let me see if I can see my Firefox. Let me share my Firefox a second. Let me see if I can get to my photo right here. I don't know if you can see my photos. Can you see this image right here? Okay, awesome. So this is a mural that I'm creating right now in Picachicum. So basically what we're doing is we're creating a mural that's almost immersive with the students over there. And we're creating different symbols. So we ask the students, find different quotes that you want people to feel empowered from when they're gonna walk into that space, because it's basically an entrance where the primary school goes into. So the kids find quotes like 2 specific quotes, such as "We're still here" and "Reclaiming the culture." This is the weather that I'm living in right now, by the way, in the school in the background. So we found indigenous indigenous leaders that were able to give us that same quote in Ojibwe scripture or lettering. And we made sure also to pass it through a lot of the elders in the community to make sure that you were writing it properly. I was able also to work with the local young up-and-coming artist, and I asked him to put some of his mark onto the mural, and I didn't realize how much that was really important for him, because like he's not the most vocal person, but on Instagram he's like the most happiest person. Oh my God, it's first time working with a graffiti artist. This is so awesome, working in collaborating project. And this is the type of project that we're able to create when we take over a space. And I ask students to be able to take a project like this. So this is a little bit of like who I am and what I've been doing over the last couple of years. And like I mentioned before, a lot of this project would not be able to happen without the respect of the community and McGill University.
Thank you, Jimmy. I'm sort of speechless. So many incredibly beautiful images and so much color and texture. An amazing reminder to use some of the terms that have come up, that your work as artists in residence, you're constructing, you're building, you're animating, you're activating, you're facilitating, and there's just so many amazing threads through these fabulous presentations. So we now have, let's see, it's 9:20. Dayna just gave me the go-ahead that we could actually stay till 9:45. So that gives us 25 minutes for discussion, and people feel free to leave when you need to, but we want to keep this space for those who have questions, if that's okay with all of our artists here. Great. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can either raise your digital hand or write it in the chat, and I can read it aloud if you'd like, if that works better for you.
I would just like to cherish on I'm super honored to be able to be in such a selective, amazing group of artists, because through this, just seeing what Dayna and Aaron have done and knowing what Maria have done, like art facilitating has so many different facets and so many different type of way to engage people and make them realize the importance of art and space and collaborative work, that it's beautiful to see how all the different perspective and cherish. And one of the comment that Dayna said about artists being paid properly for the work that they do in the space that they do. I actually had the same conversation with a organism called Elan this year about the same thing, where often I was asked to do a project or to come speak, and then I would give my price to people, and then people would be like, yeah, but then it's a little bit expensive. And I'm like, well, listen, you pay for what you got, I've worked really hard to be able to get me here. You came to see me because I have a wealth of experience. Plus, one of the things that I realized, there's not a lot of Black male artist that does graffiti-based project the way that I do, with the wealth of experience that I have for doing this for almost 20 years now. So now I'm super comfortable to make people understand that, I got to get paid to be able to do this. I love doing this. It's a pleasure to do this, but it's also a work. But also now a lot of my work is to make sure that young artists don't have to go through what I'm going through right now. For example, young artists that wants to do art facilitating, so they don't have to pay material out of their pocket because they have to wait for a check that's going to be coming in 45 days. And then they get late into their payments in life because they have to go through the bureaucracy of the system. And one of the things that I'm working on with Organism is like the bureaucracy of the system is not the problem of the artist. The artist is offering you a service, and that artist should be at least partially compensated before the artwork starts, or at least once he's done, because then it shows respect for the aspect of his work and how much effort that he comes to make sure that the project that he offers to your population, to your community, is optimal. So thank you for bringing this point of view. I just wanted to reinsure on that conversation.
Yeah, Dayna and Aaron, I was thinking you both might want to say more about that aspect of art as work. Dayna.
Well, just practically, so first of all, thank you both for your amazing work. Oh my God, I'm just so blown away and so much to digest. I'm glad we're recording everything because I'm going to want to watch everything again. But Jimmy, this point that you're raising about, I've just posted in the chat for those of you who are not familiar, an artist fee schedule by CARFAC, which is basically the Artists Union of Canada, for exactly these types of things like appearance fees, not just about exhibitions, not just about, reproductions, but about, your time, about the work and labor that goes into giving a talk. And just, I think it's just, and other artists certainly have talked about this. I know Camille Mackerel has made work about this, about that it's not about the 20 minutes or the hour. It's, a representation of a lifetime of work, but also of expertise. And especially, if you think of, different types of freelance rates, what is included in a freelance rate? That we have to factor in our own health insurance, our own pension, our own, the taxes that go into it. So it's not just, the $300. Oh my goodness. There's so much built into what those fees cover. First and foremost being our livelihood. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for bringing that up again. I'll jump off.
Great. Aaron, did you want to add something to that?
Nothing to that. No, I think you said it really well. One thing that really struck me, Jimmy, I really enjoyed seeing the work in the different projects you're doing. One of the aspects of your project that I found really inspiring is the idea of or the challenge of taking people and situations that are very comfortable within the institution and making them porous or open to situations that are outside of the institution. So I didn't know about the project you had done, bringing educators into youth, into community centers, and just sort of prompting that set of challenges. So there's something about that I don't know. I just think that's a really interesting question, and specifically, maybe if we're talking about McGill, to think about how an institution defines its boundaries, and how and maybe Lantz is an interesting occasion for this, or at least it was in our case, where you can sort of produce these situations where the institution opens up to people from outside of the institution. I mean, there's different ways of thinking about that. I'm curious about how you would think about it at McGill, but I know that's something that I think about a lot, being at McGill with these big gates and this sort of campus that is very, and even just in sort of hearing myself speak, there are ways in which I have my own thinking has been super framed by a set of concerns that are really defined by a set of conversations that happen within the university, So there's something really, I think, challenging and provoking about what what you're presenting and what you're doing. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say before I forgot.
Are there other questions from our participants? Well, I have one actually that picks up on one of these threads that Jimmy mentioned. Is, part of the job of the artist in residence is to try to, make art happen with people who might not think of themselves as artists. And I think, as Erin was saying, McGill is a particular kind of place. And one of the things that defines us sort of in relation to Concordia is that's a place where people make art, and we study and talk about art here, with the theory, and whereas Concordia has all the art practice programs. And I think that might add some different dimensions to the work of an artist in residence at McGill and in the faculty as well. So curious to hear from all three of you how you think about supporting people who might not see themselves as artists, of thinking like artists, or developing art practices or some kind of engagement.
Well, if I can go first, like for me, in my experience doing these stuff, it's often giving them overconfidence in some stuff that they do. So often when I work with young kids that, have never really drawn, who doesn't know how to create, and they'll do a stick figure, I'll make them think that this stick figure is the nicest, most amazing stick figure they've ever done in their life. But then I'd be like, have you maybe thought about, building something around it? Here, I'll show you some ideas how you can build flesh around it and start building on that skeleton and then grow from that. And that's a little bit where that woman with the afro and that with the all of us together, one of the first mural that I showed you actually comes from a Black young artist that at first she showed me a picture on Pinterest and she was like, I want to draw something like this. I was like, cool, why don't you draw it on a piece of paper? She's like, but I don't really know how to draw. I was like, well, if you start by telling yourself that you can't draw, of course you won't be able to draw, right? But let's start by learning basic techniques. All kids nowadays love manga and anime. And all kids know the basic of how to draw these characters because it's so out there. So say, okay, so circle, line separate, face separate in two, simple technique. And then I was like, just look at your image and just draw what you see. Don't think about too much about you need this to be perfect. And she ended up drawing the original sketch that we used for this mural. And I was like, all right. And I came back and I started drawing. I was like, look at you, told me you couldn't draw. This is amazing. You could see her face be like, all right. And then I was like, let's try to draw a face. And that's how some of the ways that I've learned to be able to make people feel confident, like give them trust in the limited talent that they have, and then build from that limited talent to help them grow within their level. And then it's after that, it's easier to, try to become better. Because through the pandemic, I teach a lot of graffiti online classes now through to schools. And through the pandemic, that's one of the things that I've learned doing, because I used to be able to teach these classes in person. So it's easier to interact with humans and share energy that way. But trying to do it through a screen, I had to learn to like channel my inner Bob Ross and be like, this is the best thing that you could do. Now try to do this better. It's just a happy line. And so on. And then the kids come out and they're like, oh my God, this is look like my drawing. And I was like, all right, see? So for me, that's a little bit the way, like over exude like self-confidence in myself, but also in them too.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy. We should all discover our inner Bob Rosses. I love it. Dayna, any thoughts about working with people who don't see themselves as artists?
I mean, unpopular opinion, I think is going to be my disclaimer here, because I don't work with youth like Jimmy does, and there and I'm so okay. My other disclaimer is I'm not, the comment I'm about to make is not about gatekeeping, but it is about recognizing artists as professional workers. And again, there's the Venn diagram where, like, is art a hobby for you? And that's great. And embrace that. Embrace your creativity. And there's different ways of embracing creativity. I guess I still have, flashbacks and a hangover from the Harper years, when there was just so many federal cuts to arts funding. And there was this really, anti-intellectualism, anti-artists that we're all, lighting cigars with dollar bills, and that art is for the elite. And so I guess that's, I'm talking myself into a corner here, but I guess that's my concern, is that if everyone is an artist, does that devalue art? And I'm not talking about marketplace. I'm not talking about about like the art, like, millions and millions of dollars for that marketplace. I have no relationship to that marketplace, but, art as workers, or, workers who do art, are they devalued in that process? So I guess that's more of a warning and an asterisk and raining on your parade. But that would be my concern.
Yeah, thank you. The kind of limits of the everyone can be an artist model is that then we stop valuing people who are professional artists. Aaron, thoughts on it?
Maybe, in response to both Jimmy and Dayna, maybe one thing that comes to mind is that there are situations and, again, places within an institution where people can encounter art and where people can encounter artists, and just thinking creatively about what those might be. Like, I know in the Atrium project we did, there was something really refreshing about having music in the atrium, just like a lot of people throughout the year said, wow, that was amazing that day that there was music in the atrium. And there were, Laurie organized a film screening series that happened that year. And again, I think of the Art Hive. Maria, I'm sure we'll talk more about this in her presentation, but the Art Hive, when we were there, was a space, like you're describing, Bronwen, for sort of people who don't define themselves as artists to come and make cards or make collages or just sort of inch into these practices. And so it's a kind of, maybe that's another one of these sort of hybrid spaces, or a space for a kind of encounter with the arts, just being creative about those and letting them, being a bit experimental with them too. I mean, just sort of seeing what works and what doesn't,
And I'm reminded of one of the concepts that Dayna was working with around curation. So, what is it that there are we can have many relationships to art other than artists. So curators, the facilitators, the passerby, the observer, the sort of naive participant, the professional participant, all these different situations. Jimmy, I see your hand.
Yeah, it's just to reinforce, and because I found Dayna's point of view super interesting, and it made me think about how now art and even education has never been more democratized than ever because of the advent of social media. So, for example, even if the way that they portrayed art through their comment, now you don't necessarily need to go to art school to be able to learn everything that you want in the world, right? So that has opened a whole entire world for people that never really thought of themselves as artists, and be like, oh, maybe I'll pick up watercolor today. And then they discovered that they were actually amazing watercolorist artists instead of like lawyers and so on, right? So I think that it has brought it's a great point of view, because for me, like coming from a non-formal setting of education, I've never seen, for me personally, having a paper as a proof that I'm able to, that I've accomplished something good in my life. I have done it through like experience, and that's a little bit of the type of like environment that I love to be able to share to people with whom I am. And that's why I think that personally, a lot of my project has been like really, really successful, is because I've made people feel comfortable in this level of uncomfort of trying to be an artist. Because if they paint next to someone that's amazing, or they create something that's next to somebody that knows how to do something beautiful, you kind of find yourself a little bit smaller in these type of worlds. But if you're able to kind of find an equal ground, I think it's beautiful. The only last thing I want to say is that I love the interpretation of space that the three of us were able to represent into our project, whether it's Dayna through her body, whether it's Aaron through like architecture and space and you know, walls and sound and environment, and me through muralist. I thought that this parallel was pretty awesome. So I just wanted to share that thought also.
Jimmy, I feel like that's a paragraph of the introduction, which has now been written for this collection that Dayna and Claudia are talking about. Any other questions from the group? Okay, well, we should maybe end there to give people a little space before 10 o'clock. And just as a reminder, the next panel meets at 10 a.m. We'll feature Deborah Maya de Lima, Lou Shepard, and Kamala Macrell. And you're welcome to stay in the Zoom until we start, or you can just use the same link and join us at 10. And if you stay, we might move you to the waiting room as we set up for tech. There are also 3 more panels tomorrow, and information can be found on the Symposium website, which we'll paste again in the chat. And I just want to, before we leave, give a big round of applause. I see some hands already, to our 3 spectacular artists in residence, Jimmy Baptiste, Dayna McLeod, and Aaron Richmond. Thank you for a fascinating conversation.